But let's now talk about, this is much better, what is God doing? Okay, where is God in all that is going on right now? And this is a very important point. And as I said earlier, God's perspective is the right perspective. All these other perspectives give us an element of understanding, but God's perspective is the one that brings it together and where it's really true. And so what we need to do is get God's perspective on what's going on. Now, to do that, the first thing that I want to say is that what is God doing? God is fulfilling his prophetic plan. And we're going to spend much of this hour talking about Bible prophecy. Now, it's really interesting that Bible prophecy, if you go back 40, 50 years ago, no snide comments, it was very popular and everyone was talking about Bible prophecy. And yet in our day, it seems that no one is speaking of, it's very rare. Most churches, they never study prophecy. And most Christians today in America are almost entirely ignorant of what it says in the prophets, what the prophets say about what is coming up. Now, prophecy isn't easy to interpret. One of the things that I think about prophecy is that, generally speaking, in the scriptures, they didn't figure out what he really meant until after it happened. And then they looked back and said, oh, that's what he meant. And so I don't come to you and say, I understand prophecy perfectly and I can tell you exactly what's happening and what's going to happen. Because that would seem, I'm not that confident. That would seem a little arrogant to me because I realize that prophecy is a difficult subject and that oftentimes people haven't understood in advance what a prophecy meant. And yet, we can look at the prophecies and we can see things and they inform us greatly about what has happened and what is going to happen. And so we can learn a great deal about it. Now, two things I want to say just going into it. When you're studying prophecy, you need to understand, if you look at the prophecies that were given in the past and fulfilled in Messiah. Okay, so Old Testament prophets said Messiah is going to come, he's going to do this, that, and the third thing. And then Messiah came, and we compare the prophecies and the events. We see that that the prophecies were fulfilled literally. We believe in a literal hermeneutic. Okay? Now, I had an evangelical tell me, the problem with you Baptists is that you take prophecy too literally. And I said, the problem with us Baptists is that we don't take it literally enough. Okay? Because if you look at the record, God's track record, he fulfills prophecy just like he says. If he said this is what's going to happen, folks, that's what's going to happen. It's just, his track record is very, very clear. Now, let me switch gears for just a moment and say another thing about prophecy. During the time when Christ was here on the earth, we were seeing literally hundreds of prophecies fulfilled. Vast numbers of prophecies. Bang, 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 bang. One right after the other, prophecies were being fulfilled. And they were making prophecies and they were being fulfilled. It was a time of great prophetic fulfillment during the time of Christ and even into the apostles, even up to 70 AD, the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, after 70 AD, you have a lengthy period of time when there was little or no prophetic fulfillment happening at all. Somebody's going to contradict me and I'm going to find out that I'm wrong. I can't think of any prophecies that were fulfilled from 70 AD, destruction of Jerusalem, until the 1800s. So for essentially 1800 years, prophecy was not being fulfilled. There were all this huge, there were this huge number of prophecies that God had given, but nothing was being fulfilled. For a decade, for a century, for 2, 3, 4 centuries, for 18 centuries. Nothing. But that's not true today. Sometimes people come to you and you say, we live in amazing times. And you sit in your chair and say, yeah, people always say stuff like that. Seems to me like the times are pretty much like they've always been. It's really easy to think that. The world loves to say that. Christians love to say that. You know, I'm not really sure that these are such a, maybe everything's always been this way. Let me tell you, objectively, concretely, black and white, I can tell you, there's never been a time like right now. Folks, the prophecies that were given thousands of years ago are being fulfilled one after another right before our eyes in our times. You are living in the last times. I doubt that you students will ever end up with gray hair. The days are short. And you say, well, probably old people always say that. No, I'm going to show you. The prophecies are being fulfilled. So let's dig into this. Now, prophecy is not the only thing we're going to do here, but the big thing, what is God doing prophetically? And I'm going to go back, and we're going to start back prophetically. A couple weeks ago, prophetically means late 1800s. In 70 AD, the Romans destroyed Israel. Israel was scattered among the nations. There were always some that remained there in the land, but most of the Jewish people were scattered among the nations, and they have lived there in the diaspora, scattered among the nations for thousands of years, for 1800 years. Okay, late 1800s, a movement arose that said, you know what? The Jews have been scattered among the nations. We have been persecuted. We've been strangers in a strange land. We have lived as refugees in other people's countries for 1800 years. You know, we ought to have our own homeland. This movement was called Zionism. It was not a religious movement. It was a political movement that said the Jewish people deserve to have their own homeland. Zionism started, and a trickle of Jewish people began to return to the land. You said, and they killed Arabs and stole their land. No, they went and negotiated and purchased land and got the title deed, and then they improved the land. And so a trickle of Jewish people came, and there's a word aliyah. Aliyah is a Hebrew word. It means to go up. So when we hear they went up to Jerusalem, they aliyah'd to Jerusalem, okay? In modern Hebrew, the word aliyah means to go up to Israel, to go home, to immigrate to our homeland, to Israel. And it's very common to say, oh, he made aliyah. He moved to Israel. They immigrated to live there in their homeland in Israel. And so the first aliyah was there in the late 1800s. And between like 1880 and 1920, they had 2 or 3 little trickles of Jewish people returning then back to the land. Then World War II happened, and the trickle became a flood. In Ezekiel, it says, and I will bring them out from the people, gather them from the countries. I will bring them to their own land and feed them upon the mountains of Israel by the rivers and in all the inhabited places of the country. See, God said 2,600 years ago, God said there's coming a day that my people who are scattered all around the world, there's coming a day that I'm going to bring them back from all the countries of the world, and I'm going to bring them back to their own land. God said that 2,600 years ago, and that little process started in the 1880s, trickled along. Then after World War II, it turned into a flood. And great numbers of Jewish people began to return, well, those who survived the Holocaust, began to return to the land. And we saw the fulfillment of Ezekiel 34. And by the way, and a plethora of other passages of Scripture that speak of the return of the Jewish people to the Holy Land. And that goes on today as Jewish people from around the world continue to return to Israel. And so we see the regathering of the Jewish people to Israel is a direct answer to an ancient prophecy, okay? Then God also said, I will bring again the captivity of my people of Israel, and they shall build the waste cities and inhabit them. They shall plant vineyards and drink the wine thereof. They shall also make gardens and eat the fruit of them. I will plant them upon their land, and they shall no more be pulled out of their land, which I have given them, saith the Lord thy God. And so God says, not only will I bring them back to the land, but I will establish them as a nation again. Now, folks, never in the history of the world has this happened. A country died in 70 AD. It died, it was buried, it was gone, it was over. And it laid there in the grave for 1,800 years. And the Scriptures talk about the valley of dry bones. And God shows a prophet of a valley just full of dry bones. And he says to the prophet, can these bones live? And the prophet, who was very clever, didn't say yes or no. He said, I bet you know, God. Great answer. I'm not sure, but I bet you know. And the bones began to move. And bone began to join back to bone. Until we didn't have bones, we had skeletons. And then it says that the sinews and the muscles and then the flesh, and then they all stood up and they lived. And you're like, oh, that is weird. It happened. A country dead for 1,800 years came back to life. This is not a zombie movie. This is history, 1948. Okay? David Ben-Gurion stands up in a house there. It was just a mile from the church that I pastored in Tel Aviv. He stands up there, gathers the people together, and declares that on this day, the nation of Israel is reestablished. And a prophecy from thousands of years ago was fulfilled on that day in 48. The return of the Russian Jews. This is one of my favorites. You know that I have that I served in Russia for many years, and so I care about that part of the world. In Jeremiah chapter 31, which is also one of my favorite chapters in the Bible, in verse 8, it says, "Behold, I will gather them from the north country, gather them from the coasts of the earth." Now, when Jeremiah wrote these words, there were no Jewish people in the north country. If you look at a map and you find Jerusalem and then you go straight north, you find the former Soviet Union. And when Jeremiah wrote this word, there were probably no Jews at all in the Soviet Union. But God knew that someday the Soviet Union would have the world's third largest population of Jewish people. And so God told the prophet way back here, there's going to come a day when I'm gather my people from the north country, gather them from the coast of the earth, with them the blind and the lame, the woman with child, and her that travaileth with child together. A great company shall return thither. A great number of them will to return thither. In 1948, Israel was founded, but the Jews of the Soviet Union were not allowed to go. You've heard of the Iron Curtain. The Iron Curtain was a barrier. It wasn't a physical barrier. It was the border guards and the border fences and all of that surrounded the Soviet Union. It wasn't to keep the enemies out. It was to keep the enslaved people inside from getting away. And those people couldn't leave. So in 48, Israel was founded. The Jewish people in the Soviet Union said, we'd like to go home to Israel. And the Soviet Union said, you're not going anywhere. You stay right here. And it stayed that way until 91. The Soviet Union fell. And when it did, 80% of the Russian Jews got up and left. Most of them went to Israel. A great flood of them went to Israel, to the point where Israel was a country of about 5 million people. It's a small country. And suddenly 1.5 million Russian Jews showed up on the doorstep. It was a very challenging time. A huge number of immigrants all at once in a great flood. It does say here, a great company shall return thither. And 1.5 million Russian immigrants, that would qualify as a great company returning thither. They all came. And so now today, strangely enough, 1 out of every 5, 20% of the Israelis grew up speaking Russian. Это здорово, мне нравится очень. It's perfect. I was serving in Moscow, and God sent me then to go to Israel. I lived in Bat Yam, which is a town that is almost half Russian, and many of the stores are Russian. It was great. And I pastored a church that was 40% Russian. It was fantastic. And these people in this photograph are my people. These are some of the people. These are some of the Russian people from Messiah Baptist Tabernacle. And we would sit together around the table doing our midweek Bible study, and I would look at them and I would say, do you see this prophecy in Jeremiah 31:8? And they say, yes, we see it, Pastor. I say, you are the fulfillment of a prophecy from thousands of years ago, and it is fulfilled in you, my dear friends. And that's, to me, very exciting. Maybe it's not to you. And so the Russian Jews came back to the land, amazingly. And then the Bible speaks of an evil alliance by Gog and Magog. And you need to open your Bibles to Ezekiel 38. You need to go there because you need to see this. You need to mark this. Some of you already have it marked. Now I'm going to read, and then I'm going to come back and we're going to talk about it. It says in verse 1, Ezekiel 38:1, and the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him. And say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. And I will turn thee back and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth. And all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords. And so he says here that there's going to be this great company. Now, what do we learn about them as we study them? I'm looking, there's another parallel passage a chapter later where it talks about that they're going to come down from the north. You say, who are these people and why do we care? Well, Gog and Magog actually is not two people. Magog is a land, and Gog is the ruler of that land, the prince or the king or the whatever, the ruler of the land. And so Gog is a person and Magog is the land. Okay? And most scholars believe that Magog speaks of the land of Russia. And if we look a chapter over, it's going to say that they're going to come down from the north, which also speaks of Russia. And so, and by the way, the Russians believe that Magog speaks of Russia too. And so Magog, we believe to be Russia. And it says, he's saying here, he's honestly kind of taunting Gog, this ruler of this land named Magog. And he says, I'm going to put a hook in your jaw and I'm going to bring you forth all of your armies and you're going to come down against Israel. And so God is going to bring Russia down against Israel. We know that a day is coming when Russia will attack in force against Israel. Okay, now, let me just go on. Go to verse 5. Persia, Ethiopia and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet. Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah and the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. And so it talks about all of these different countries coming down against the land of Israel. Now, I wanted to make a map so that you could have a better understanding of what this looks like. So the red part is Russia. I've lived in Russia. I've lived there for 14 years. This is just logical. If the world has 24 hours in a day, then there must be 24 time zones in the world. There are 24 time zones in the world. 11 of them are in Russia. That's how big Russia is. 11 of the world's 24 time zones are there. Okay, another thing, I lived in Moscow. Roughly 15 million people. That's more people than live in the entire nation of Israel. One city in Russia is bigger than the entire nation of Israel. And you look at this map and you say, Russia, and it's like this giant country. And then you say, Israel. Is Israel on there? I can't see it. You see that little tiny blue splinter? That's Israel. Okay, and so we're talking about this red colossus coming down against this tiny blue splinter. Perhaps that doesn't seem like a fair fight. I don't think it is a fair fight. But it's going to get worse. Because it also goes on, and it not only says that, but it says Persia, Ethiopia, Libya is coming with them. Russia doesn't want to come down against Israel alone. It's bringing friends. It's bringing help. So the overwhelming mismatch just became vastly more overwhelming. Who are these friends, in quotation marks? Well, it talks about them and it says Persia. And the good news is there is no longer a country named Persia. Doesn't exist. It's called Iran now. Yeah, the people who this week are fighting Israel. Yeah, that Iran. And so it says there's going to be an alliance between Russia and Persia. And then as we go further, it says Ethiopia and Libya, other Arab nations who are also hostile to Israel. And then it talks in verse 6 about Gomer and his bands, the house of Togarmah and of the north quarters. Most scholars are going to say that they think that that is Turkey. And that's how I've marked it on the map. And so Israel is facing this enormous conspiracy, this huge alliance that is going to come together and gather together and attack Israel. You say, well, Brother Wilson, do you think that's going to happen? No, I don't think it's going to happen. The Bible says it's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. Okay, that's positive. You say, when do you think it's going to happen? I don't know when it's going to happen. But I do know that right now, Vladimir Putin of Russia, the Ayatollah of Iran, and Erdogan of Turkey are gathering on a regular basis and being best of buddies and making plans. Folks, that photograph is Ezekiel 38 in graphic form. Okay? What I'm saying is that the alliance that was predicted by Ezekiel in Ezekiel 38 has already been formed. It's ready to go today. Okay? Now, this is a little aside. Just go with me for a minute. okay? Russia is attacking its neighbor, Ukraine, and is going through vast amounts of military equipment, incredible amounts, because it needs to attack the civilian infrastructure of Ukraine. And for reasons that I'm not going into right now. I don't stay calm when I talk about that, so I'll leave it be. And so Russia is literally running out of precision munitions because it's trashing everything in Ukraine. And so what can it do? So Russia is going around with their little tin cup to all of their nice friends, North Korea, China, Iran, please, missiles for the poor. Please, can you give us some missiles? We need some missiles. And North Korea, China, and Iran are helping them. Now, I do not know, I was not in the room, I do not know what the negotiation looked like when Russia came to Iran. It could be that Russia said, Iran, would you sell us some missiles? And Iran said, give us some rubles, we'll give you some missiles. Maybe that's what happened. Consider this for a moment. Maybe Russia shows up at Iran's doorstep and says, could we buy some missiles for you? And Iran says, so you're having a little problem with your neighbor Ukraine, are you? And you would like our help to take down your neighbor Ukraine. So I'll tell you what, Russia, how about this? We'll agree to sell you missiles so that you can beat up your neighbor Ukraine on the condition that when we go against our neighbor Israel, you come in with us. Do you think that could have happened? I don't know that that happened. It seems to me more likely than not that it happened. And in the last 2 weeks, we have seen war begin between Iran and Israel. I told somebody at the very start of this conflict 6 months ago, after October 7th, I said, look, there's going to be a terrible war between Israel and Hamas. And it's going to be awful. But that's probably our best outcome right now. Awful is probably the best thing, because it could get worse. You say, how could it get worse? Well, Hezbollah could get involved. They are also financed by Iran. They could get involved and shoot off the 150,000 missiles that they have at Israel. That would be worse. But that wouldn't be the worst thing. Then the worst thing would, the next step up would be that, and by the way, if, the Hamas thing, please pray. What if Hezbollah, pray more. What if Iran gets involved then, because they are the ones that are supporting and training and equipping these guys? What if Iran gets in and they also attack Israel, which happened, by the way, a few days ago? I said, then you need to really, really pray. And then if you turn on the news and you see in the news, look, Russia has come in on Iran's side, which seems perfectly likely to happen, then quit praying, jump up, run out your front door and look at the eastern sky. Because we are now at Ezekiel 38, and the Lord's coming is nigh. I do not know what is going to happen here. Well, I do know. All of this stuff that I'm saying is absolutely going to happen. Is it going to happen this week? I don't know. But folks, literally, we could be in Ezekiel 38 by the end of the week. That's where the world is. Everything is set. The alliance is made. The combatants are ready to go. Everything, we live today on the very edge of all of this kicking off. God's prophetic plans are moving. Next chapter, Ezekiel 39. There's a verse here where it talks about, verse 4, where it says, and thou shalt fall upon the mountains of Israel, thou and all thy bands and the people that is with thee. Russia on the mountains of Israel, Ezekiel 39:4. There's kind of this amusing thing that Israel and Syria keep getting into wars with each other. 1948, 1967, 1973. And in 1973, can you see the black spot between Israel and Syria on the map? There's a black area. That's called the Golan Heights. And it was a place that after Israel's war for independence, Syria ended up owning that. But during the 1973 war, no, I think it was during the 67 war, Israel took the Golan Heights, which is really good because the Syrians had artillery up there and they shelled Galilee all day long every day. And so Israel's like, we got to take that because our farmers are getting shelled while they try to plow the crops. And so Israel took the Golan Heights. I think that was in the 67 war. And now there is a border there between Israel and Syria up there by the Golan Heights, and these countries don't like each other, so the UN went in there and said, we're going to put up a zone right down in the middle of that where there's a space between them, where it's a no man's land so that nobody can hit each other. And so both sides are heavily armed. The Israelis are here and they're armed against the Syrians, and the Syrians are on this side and they're heavily armed against the Israelis, and they're there. And there are UN peacekeepers in the front. That's, by the way, a job you don't necessarily want. And they're right in between these two armies. But the peacekeepers a while back said, we don't want to do this anymore. And so Russia said, we'll send our troops to patrol that area. And Israel said, no, thank you. But then a civil war started in Syria because the horrible dictator of Syria was horribly abusing his people. And so they rose up against him. And there's a terrible civil war that has devastated the country of Syria. And Russia said, we'll help. And they came in, of course, on the side of the horrible, evil dictator. And they came in and began to slaughter the people that were wanting to be free. And now there are Russian troops all through Syria. And today, this is a picture shot from the Israeli side, because where those Syrians were had outposts just a few yards over there on the other side of the demilitarized zone, now we have Russians today on the mountains. Well, it's not technically the mountains of Israel. It's like 100 yards away from the mountains of Israel. Matthew 24:9 says, and ye shall be hated of all nations for my name's sake. Anti-Semitism has always been a thing in the world. Jewish people everywhere have suffered from anti-Semitism. Honestly, we live in a land that has less anti-Semitism than any other land I know of in the world. America is the least anti-Semitic country in the world, and yet still there's a dislike and a hatred for the Jewish people even here. It's very minor compared to the way it is in most parts of the world, but it's still a thing. And now Jewish people around the world are looking, and in London the streets are packed with thousands of people screaming death to Israel, praising Hamas, standing with Hamas, shouting the slogan from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, meaning destroy all the Jews. In Berlin, in Washington, D.C., in Sydney, Australia, literally all over the world, there are vast crowds of people fiercely, vehemently screaming out hatred for Israel and the Jewish people. We have never seen a time like this. It's terrifying. If you're a Jewish person, it is terrifying to see the awful rise of anti-Semitism that is sweeping the world. God said that all nations of the world would hate them, and we're seeing. Look, 6 months ago, you would have said, well, that's not really true. Oh, it's true today. America has been this bastion of support for Israel. Folks, that is going away like this. Among people in my generation, there's very strong support for Israel. Among people in your generation, there's great hatred for Israel in many quarters. Check the polls. Younger Americans think the Palestinians are the good guys. They think Hamas is the good guys. I love you, but I question the wisdom of some people in your generation. Zechariah says, behold, the day of the Lord cometh, and thy spoil shall be divided in the midst of thee, for I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. The city shall be taken, the houses rifled, the women ravished, and on and on and on. He says there's a day coming when all nations of the world will come against Israel in battle. And when you look at the news today, and you see in all nations of the world vast thousands, tens of thousands of people in protest against Israel, the news media constantly demonizing Israel and telling a very, very slanted story, and Israel being pilloried in the press, and people everywhere raising up and spewing hatred for the Jewish people. Then you look at Zechariah 14:1 and 2, and you're like, suddenly this seems like it could happen tomorrow. And so this explosion of anti-Semitism is going on. There's one more prophecy I want to talk about that hasn't been fulfilled, but I love it, and so I'm going to mention it anyway. So everything I've been talking about has either already happened or is on the edge of happening. There's one more thing happening that I want to tell you about. In Ezekiel 36, it says, "For I will take you from among the heathen, gather you out of all countries, and bring you into your own land." I think we already talked about that. But then in 25, he says, "I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and you shall be clean from all your filthiness. From your idols will I cleanse you. A new heart will I give you, a new spirit will I put within you. I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh and will give you a heart of flesh. I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes, and you shall keep my judgments and do them." Folks, Paul wrote that the Jewish people are enemies for the gospel's sake, but beloved for God's sake. But there's a day coming very soon when there's going to be a great revival, and the Jewish people are going to turn to God. The prophecy here that we're reading it's interesting because in the Old Testament, it takes the prophecy of their regathering and of their revival, and it puts it right together. But what we've seen right now is the regathering has happened, and we're waiting for the next verse. We're waiting for that revival that is soon to come. And so we rejoice greatly in the coming revival that we know is going to happen. Now, I'm going to leave prophecy for a minute. And actually, I still have a few minutes, which is lovely. An unexpected pleasure. So when we say, what is God doing, which is the point of this hour's session, what is God doing? The first thing I want to say is that God is fulfilling his prophetic plan. When I look at the world today, it's heavy for me. It's really hard. I love the people of Ukraine. I have dear friends there. I've preached all over that country, and I love those people, and they are suffering horribly. And it hurts my heart. I love Israel. And those people are suffering a lot. They're suffering horribly, and it hurts. And folks, I want to tell you that I could be weighed down with sorrow over the pain and the suffering of people that I love around the world right now. But God has told me, he said, look, I told you what was going to happen. It's all in here. This had to happen. You know, the disciples were distraught when Christ was crucified. And then on the road of the Messiah, on the road to Emmaus, the Jesus who they did not yet recognize said, you slow of heart. Didn't you know that the Messiah had to go through this? The suffering had to come for the resurrection and the salvation of the world. And we are in a terrible place in the world right now. And it's going to get worse. And when I look at the condition of the world, it breaks my heart. But then God has shown me, lift up your eyes. Don't look at the world. Look at what I'm doing. You know where this is going. This story is going to get darker and darker and darker, and then it's going to get very bright because I'm coming back and I'm going to set right all of the wrongs. And so, by the way, I really want to say, as a representative of the older generation, and I'm speaking to the younger generation, I just want to say that we have left you a world that's falling apart. Congratulations. I hope you enjoy that. You can thank us later. I don't think we've done a great job here, but folks, the Lord's coming. And everything that's happening is in his control. And we've got to trust him. And we've got to say, Lord, I know where I don't know where this road leads. I think it leads downward and darker. But I know that you've got this all in control, and I know where it's going to end up. And so I trust you with this. And we've got to trust him even in this time of sorrow. What is God doing with Israel? So we know what God's doing with prophecy. What is God doing with Israel? And I want to say to you that God is working in Israel today in this time of troubles. My wife called me yesterday. There's another ministry. I wish it was our ministry, but another ministry. And she got a letter from them. And they said this is yesterday. They said, we are getting hundreds of They have a ministry where they're reaching out through internet and through media. They're in Israel, and they're reaching out to the Jewish people in Israel through media. And they said, we're getting hundreds of letters a month from people who want to know more about Christ. We have a Hebrew language YouTube channel. So, you and I aren't going to be watching it because Hebrew. They have over 100,000 subscribers that are watching it in Hebrew. They say the downloads of the Hebrew Bible, they say so far this year, in the 3.5 months of this year, we've had 4,400 people download the Hebrew Bible. They wanted to read the Hebrew Bible. He said that's more downloads than we had the whole year last year. That distribution of Bibles is up more than double, 108% increase. There's a hunger in Israel for the truth that they've never seen before. Folks, the situation there is heartbreaking, and terrible things have happened, but God is working. What is God doing with Israel? God is reaching out his hand to Israel. God is saying, wake up. Israel, consider your ways. Lift up your eyes. Look to the God who made you. Turn back to me. God is giving Israel during these days another opportunity to turn to him. The geopolitical people would say, look, it's just a disaster and it's about Iran, and yes, there's an element of truth in that, but God would say, don't believe that that's the whole truth. The truth of the matter is that I am working and I'm giving my people, I'm shaking them and trying to waken them and turn them back to myself. God is working. Well, what about Iran? Is God working in Iran? What's God going to do with Iran? So I really, really considered this morning not wearing a suit and tie, but I thought I would get thrown out of the church. I thought about coming wearing a t-shirt today. This t-shirt. Oh, hang on, I've got a picture of it. Let me bring up the picture of it so you can see it better. I got this t-shirt from Israel. I bought it in Masada. Okay? And it says here, civilizations, nations, and empires that have tried to destroy the Jewish people. And it lists them. Okay, ancient Egypt, Philistines, Assyrian Empire, Babylonian Empire, Persian Empire, Greek Empire, Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, the Crusaders, the Spanish Empire, Nazi Germany, and the Soviet Union. And then it tells the status of each one. Gone, 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 gone. They're all gone. And so this little nation of Israel has been, every civilization and empire throughout history has been trying to destroy them. Those great empires are gone and Israel yet remains. And then the last line of this thing says Iran. Question mark, question mark, question mark. So you figure it out. Gone, 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 question mark. What do you think's going to happen? And then the subscript, which is a little snarky, says the Jewish people, the smallest of nations, but with a friend in the highest of places, so be nice. The question that is really most important right now, though, for us, here in Menominee Falls is, what is God doing with us? What's he doing in our lives? And in 2 Peter, there's a passage of scripture where Peter says, in chapter 3, verse 1, 2 Peter 3:1, this second epistle, beloved, I now write unto you, in both which I stir up your pure minds by way of remembrance, that you might be mindful of the words which were spoken before of the holy prophets, and of the commandment of us, the apostles of the Lord and Savior. And he says, look, I'm writing this to remind you of what the prophets have said. And this session today has been about reminding you of what the prophets have said and showing you that these things are coming to pass. God who promised is faithful, and his word is true, and it is coming to pass. And then if we go down, you say, prophecy is so interesting, but a lot of people say, but there's no real benefit in it. Well, I strongly disagree. I want you to look at verse 11. At the end of the discussion of prophecy, Peter writes, and he says, seeing then that all these things shall be dissolved, what manner of persons ought ye to be in all holy conversation and godliness? Do you see what he's saying? He's saying, look, because of prophecy, because we see the end coming, because we see the soon coming of the Lord, how should you be living? What should you be doing? And there's a lot of answers that we could talk about to that question. But let me just go over to John chapter 9, verse 4. Jesus said, I must work the works of him that sent me while it is day. Night cometh when no man can work. Young people, I would say to you that our time is short. We're at the end now. Time is short. And it's time for us to be all in and to do everything we can in our service for the Lord. I'm 65. I don't think you have this many years to serve God. So use the days that God gives you to great effect. If you're thinking about doing something for God, do it. If there's sin that needs to be dealt with, do it. Now is the time to get real with God. Now is the time to serve him. Do not delay. Because this is a weird thought. This is a very strange thought. I know that you're constantly told that you need to be witnessing to the lost. But very soon there's a day coming when your pastor will never, ever, ever again exhort you to witness to the lost. Because that day will be over. Night cometh when no man can work. Pretty soon the buzzer is going to sound. Actually, the trumpet's going to sound. And it'll be over. And if we neglected to do it, we will forever lose the opportunity to do the things that God has called us to do. And so I think especially of soul winning, of sharing the gospel with the lost. Do not delay. Now is the time. I think about the Jewish people who mostly are perishing without Christ. And I beg of you, take the gospel to the dear Jewish people while we have time. Night cometh when no man can work.